So, welcome, Vic.
Thanks.
Vic Hyland. And we're going to talk about songwriting and other related subjects.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you came.
Yes, well, thanks for inviting me. The tables are turned.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Vic interviewed me for his podcast earlier in the year, which was very enjoyable to see what came out of my mouth. So I've got a few questions I want to ask, and let's start with what I would call your musical history.
Yeah, okay. Obviously, I'm of a certain age, as you sort of pointed out earlier. And obviously, when I started off as a guitar player, going back to, I suppose, late 60s, early 70s, when I sort of started playing, there was no music books, so obviously no tab, everything, you had to work it out off the record, which followed on the tradition of a lot of other people. So what became interesting is about this, but only in hindsight now, after being teaching for quite a number of years, that actually was a brilliant way of developing your ear and being able to dissect music, because there was a limited amount of stuff that you could do, just basically what you could work out or what you could find out. And there was also, of course, in that time, the sort of lingua franca, if you like, was blues, rock and roll. If you got together with anybody, you jammed. It was 12-bar blues, and that was part of the language. So what happened was that I sort of fell into playing music, really. I got sort of really involved with friends, and then that became, bands, and these guys went off and did other things as well. And I then realised that that's, because there wasn't, it wasn't a career path, because there was no such thing. If you went to what was termed as a careers lesson, which were few and far between. If you turned around and said you wanted to be a musician, they'd laugh you out anyway. That's not even saying I want to be a guitar player playing in a rock band. That would have been just like total heresy. So basically, what happened was I just started gigging. But I really enjoyed, obviously, playing things like blues and rock and stuff like that. But I was always interested in sort of an eclectic sort of mix of stuff, So it's good fun sort of playing with an instrument that's not what we go like standard bass and drums and all the rest of it. And very early on, I got interested in Indian music. But what really started to kick the ball, into play was I started working in a band, and there were a lot of really good songwriters in it. There was a guy who'd been in a punk band called The Jump that were related to a lot of the punk bands in London, not Gang of Four. There was Splodge Nessabounds was one of the spin-offs. So one of the spin-offs of
wasn't that 3 Pints of Beer in a Packet? Yeah,
that's the one, absolutely the one. So there was something to do with them, and King Kurt was another band that so all spun off of it. Yeah. But this guy was brilliant, but he was very eccentric character, and he come from Temple Hill in Dartford, which is the sort of the sacred ground of Keith Richards. There's a lot of characters like that, who just sort of seem to do the thing, but they don't quite know what they're doing. So working with this guy, he had this ability with words, but he just loved the sound of words. So he would put words together that really sort of made no sense, but just sounded amazing. And because there was me trying to write a lyric, and he'd go like, it's not another love song. There are too many of them, type of thing. And I learned how to sort of turn a phrase in such a way that you could do interesting things with it. And also, because of his sort of way of dealing with things, be able to really get in, and obviously because I've been working things out for records, really sort of get the nub of stuff and like a structure, and then be able to use those ideas in another way. So what happened was that we then, as you do, just got involved in playing reggae, which was like not something I hadn't played and wasn't actually particularly interested in. But the guy who was managing us said, look, you know, there's a big scene for this. Try it. So we kicked this idea around it, and this guy I was telling you about was a great reggae bass player. He just had the feel. And within about 6 months or so, we were doing this stuff that was really, really good. You know, it had the groove and everything. And then it probably took us a year to really get it so that we sounded as good as, I won't say as good as a black band, but, you know, good enough for black people to come and see us play. So that was, you know. But what we did was that we started using musical ideas outside. So this was really, and I wasn't aware of this, but it was really honing my way of being able to understand how to write, how to come at things from like a left field perspective, which is what I've carried on.
And this was the time of the Police as well.
Yes.
So in a way, in a way, because that was, I was just telling you earlier about Rick Beato's YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And it's been re-educating me, making me aware of certain aspects of song production and record production, or recording production. And when he went into, of course, he's quite a big fan of Sting, so which is, you know, a lot of good reason for that. And when he got into Sting, he reminded everybody that, of course, that's one of the things that came in along with punk. It was like punk and reggae. Yes, it was like there was a whole wave of it at the time. Yeah,
now that's really interesting, because the Police thing, again, they went through that sort of thing where they were a punk band, and then somewhere along the line, it was like, well, we've got to do the reggae thing, right? So you got this, and certainly the early albums, again, this is like the analysis thing, you got the reggae thing going, and then you get to the choruses, and it's like straight ahead power punk sort of thing, or power pop, you know. The chords sort of go into fifth chords, you know, the sort of heavy chords, and then back out again, and you get that sort of groove. And it worked for them throughout those early albums. I mean, more or less all the songs are in that sort of structure.
But the difference with the Police, of course, was that firstly, they were all top musicians, top-rate musicians, and secondly, you've got a master songwriter, who was still really developing his songwriting.
Yes, absolutely. And again, you know, this is one of the things I think. You know, just sort of going off a slight tangent, but Zeppelin's another good example of that. You know, you look at that stuff and you think, well, they were master musicians. They'd honed their skill somewhere else, and they had the way of looking at something and go, that, and that, and you've got, you know, you could just pull those things together. You know. But yeah, so the Police were a big influence on us, but it was really, you know, how could we use that Stones type guitar in a reggae? You know, how could we use a flamenco thing in reggae? We were doing all this stuff with things, but of course the interesting thing about reggae is it's a melting pot anyway. And I've done some interviews on the podcast. So I interviewed Sam Kelly, the drummer's brother, a guy called George Kelly, who's an artist who does a lot of African-based art, and he was talking about Jamaica because he lived there until he was about 12, and the sort of melting pot of music. Because we sort of look at that and go, oh yeah, well, there was this and there was that, but he said, no, well, it was everything. You know, we had the jazz thing. You know, that was the epitome of like the pinnacle of black achievement. You know, this is in the words of George. But of course, you've got the sort of R&B influences and you know, all the stuff where the people were going from Jamaica and going working in America for a few months and then coming back and they bring the records with them. So it's a tradition, really. Even
similar to, of course, the Beatles getting the records off the ships,
exactly,
and down in the south on the coast there.
Absolutely.
Again, you know.
Well, that conversation, I think I might have shared this with you. I had with Chaz Hodges of Chaz and Dave. You know, because that was the thing. I was sort of at the tail end of that because my brother was in the Merchant Navy, and he used to bring back a load of 78s, you know, the Ink Spots and the Drifters and stuff like that, which I listened to. But of course, Chaz was, you know, a generation before me, and of course there was nothing unless you knew a guy from the Merchant Navy, right? And that's why you got those bands appearing in all the ports, you know, Liverpool and, you know, London and all the rest of it. And I think they're the sort of things that you look at and go, well, it's almost like that limited amount of possibilities was an important thing. Instead of having like now, you can just find anything.
Yep.
And it seems to sort of dilute the essence of what it is that people could develop as a musician. Yeah. And I think that was an important thing. So a lot of that, that early work with that band, which is a band called Bravura, and we had the sort of airplay and the single that nearly, the deal that nearly made it and all that lark, a lot of airplay around Britain and things. And in the end, that sort of dissolved, that band, and I started this thing called Red Touch, which has sort of lasted really till now, actually.
What's it called again?
Red Touch,
right.
It was just an idea. In fact, I'd seen it as a piece of art on I think it was probably National Geographic, but it was a wall in, I don't know, somewhere in the Middle East where somebody put a red handprint. And it was just so powerful. I thought, my God. So it was the logo that became the word. And I then started writing more outside of the realm of reggae and just doing, so it became more like Sting actually from that point of view, where it was like, it's the song. Whatever the song develops as, that's where we go. But what happened, we had this interesting diversion where I worked with Roger Morsa. To cut a very long story short, somebody contacted me and said, look, I've got this guy who's interested in some stuff, come and meet him. And I had no idea who the guy was. So anyway, he already had an EMI contract. And but he didn't like what he was doing. And we basically put the band around him. And then I songwrote for him, with him. And that was interesting because that got me into the thing of being able to write a song within a time frame. Like, you need 3 songs this week. And it's like, okay.
Like the classic Hit Factory. Like
absolutely. Absolutely.
In New York.
And it was that sort of, Denmark Street thing, that, Tin Pan Alley type of lark. And it's interesting that, again, a lot of this is like, and you must know this, you get an idea and something resonates, and it's like, that's it. And it's like it's not you. Often, you get that sort of thing, if it's like, there's something there, and it's like you're part of the alchemy somehow. But you've got to have the tools, obviously, to do that. So that was a great experience for me. And then, as things go, life gets sort of in the way. So I got involved in teaching, big time. But I was always teaching right from the early days. But that was then the thing that was the safe thing for me. So although I was gigging and stuff like that, it always came back to. And I was lucky. I had a lot of pupils, and because I taught in a very sort of, I was interested in people and finding what people could do, and then sort of going with that. I've had some sort of big successes with that.
And to bring it up to date, then you've been introducing like school kids age to songwriting as well. Yeah. I mean, some of the guys that I've taught and girls that I've taught, they've gone on to do the West End stars, people that work for people like Adele, Sam Smith, and that sort of thing where you can take somebody and teach them that broad set of skills that they understand, because obviously you understand how to songwrite, you understand how to arrange, you also understand how the guitar fits into a sound. Like you can listen, and it's your songwriting ear that thinks there's that spot for the guitar there, not just, well, the guitar's just going to do that, which is not the same thing. It's like allowing that song to give a space to the instrument. Because there's in a way, I think when you get to a certain stage where you've got kind of your producer skill and you've got your songwriting skill, and sometimes they merge, sometimes it's completely separate, and depending how the song's written and what the intention is, and if there's a reason to write it. And
exactly. So there's a bit of a grey area, as you say, with all those things. But that's an important thing, and I try to teach that very early on, that because I've got this thing about music being commoditised. It's a thing. It's like, we can have that, and it's in a little box. But of course, it's not like that. It's this thing that's like a spirit. And songs have a life. They are a thing. They live. And I like to get pupils to understand that and understand how they fit into that, because this is going down a rabbit hole here, but music is a healing thing. It's a thing that you discover yourself through. It's great for young people to develop their self-confidence. We know it's got healing qualities for people that have got mental illness and all sorts of things.
Have you found that in your experience of working with kids, that this has been very beneficial for the kids in terms of means of expression, creativity?
Yeah. I've got a little music charity which I teach. I don't like to say teach children to songwrite, because it's not really that. It's allowing them to create. Okay, because I use a lot of lateral thinking techniques like cut up. The Bowie made sort of famous, but it's a sort of Burroughs and Brian Gyson thing of like.
You mean when you're songwriting?
Yeah, I do that a lot.
Okay. Like the famous moments of like John Lennon writing. What was it? The song of Sergeant Pepper. Well, they would. That was
Day in the Life.
Yeah,
Day in the Life.
That's the famous moment. Isn't
Yes,
it
is.
With
Day in the
cutting
Life actually tells you exactly how cut up works. I read the news today.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
And it's just bits out of the newspaper. It's also a bit out of a film. And then that in itself is cut up because it's more than one song. You got Lennon's thing. You got McCartney's thing. And then you got the orchestral thing, the George Martin thing, and and then it's back again, and all the rest of it, right? And it's all sort of mushed together. And it's like, well, that shouldn't work. But the whole album's like that. It sounds like a great concept album, but it isn't. It's just like a load of random things thrown together. But it sounds like there's something cohesive, which is exactly what happens with cut up. If you take lyrics and take things out of magazines and put them together, then you read them back. It's like they hang together.
So is that a technique which you would introduce when you're teaching songwriting?
Yeah, I do that a lot. That's not the only technique, but it's an important one, because it's almost like it gets around this problem of people either coming up with a cliche, right, which is quite common. You say to somebody, write a poem. I mean, how do you start? I was walking down the street, it's that type of thing. Well, no. So you've got to come in from another perspective, and that's great for that. But then there's that sort of weird, sort of magical thing that happens when you put phrases together randomly. Something, whether that's the right side of the brain or whatever it is, creates that sort of link between the two. It's almost like a narrative thing that winds through it somehow. And it's sort of bizarre. And I've had some very odd things happen with that when I've been sort of showing people how to do that. Like festivals I've done this, and people have said, well, that's weird, because we've just done something about the talk that happened this morning when I wasn't there. It's like, okay. But this is just random out of magazines and things. So there's something very strange. It's almost like you're sifting through the unconscious somehow. And I think that's why it's so powerful. Again, you've only got to look at songs by Bowie and Lennon and Mark Bowie.
I have to admit, I've not used that technique ever.
No.
But what I'm reminded of is in my study of what I would call the greats.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon. Let's say for three examples.
Yeah.
They all, when you study their life and how they got to where they got to, Paul Simon, he was a major in poetry at university. Bob Dylan, sat at the feet of Woody Guthrie.
Yeah.
And etc. One stories I like to tell. Leonard Cohen, he was basically a failed poet, and that's the reason we got Leonard Cohen.
Exactly.
Because he couldn't make it as a novelist and a poet.
Exactly. Yeah.
But they all grafted.
Yes.
And like you say, in those days, you really had to pay your dues.
Yeah,
it
totally.
was just,
The thing is with cut up, it's not an easy route. Right, that's the thing. But what it does is it just gets that analytical thing out of the way to let the creative thing flow. And then when you've got to the point where it's sort of like, it's flowing, and you've got loads of ideas down, then you can bring the editor back in, and then you can trim things up. You can take the verse out, and all this sort of thing. You can get the structure in whatever structure you want. So, but the thing is that that's not just with lyrics. You can do that with music. Shall I show you?
Absolutely.
So let me just. If you take obviously there are lots of patterns that are standard patterns in songs, right? So you could take the C, G, A minor, F. So they're like principal chords of the key of C. Well, that you could just keep that, because that could be anything from so like that works fine. But you could move them around. So you could have C to A minor to G to F, right? And then that's another pattern. Yeah, so that's something you could do. So you can take the chords and turn them around. You can take melodies and turn them around. I like to. This is like a guitar riff or something. So classic one. All right, Smoke on the Water. Okay. So if you turn that upside down, you've now got something else. It almost sounds like a sort of ZZ Top riff now, doesn't
it? Everything comes from something.
Yeah, all right?
Yeah.
But of course the interesting thing is that there's another Deep Purple song called Burn, which is Smoke on the Water.
You're talking my territory now. I was a massive Deep Purple fan.
But you can see it's the same idea, same key and everything.
Yeah.
All right? So the point is that if you were writing for an album that had to be out in a particular time, you couldn't just wait for an idea to come. But this is the same thing for people like Cole Porter. I mean, there's a great story of Cole Porter. Somebody went up to Cole Porter at a party and said, is it true, Mr. Porter, you can write a song about anything? He said, yes, because he wasn't sure coming forward, was he? So they gave him a business card, and on this business card it had written on the back, Miss Otis regrets she is unable to make the lunch appointment. He said, okay. He took it away, half an hour, he's back, and he sits at the piano, and he's written Miss Otis regrets.
Yeah.
And it took half an hour from that simple idea.
Yeah.
So, obviously, when you get to the point of crafting things, you've got to start with something. Well, so you've got to start with something. It's good to start with something, but then you can turn it around, turn it inside out, and see what you come up with.
There's a famous, I remember reading an interview with Bobby Womack, and he said he would just, sometimes people would just say something, and it's like you grab that phrase that they have just said, and he would just make whole songs out of it as well.
That's it. Well, same thing, isn't it?
And like you say, when you've got to that point of you're a real crafter, you've really got that depth in the songwriting.
Exactly. Love me like no one could. nice sound that is.
Is that the first time you played with Cora?
Yes, it is actually. Yeah, I think it is. So it's got it's got that sort of sound that. How can I put that? There's a sort of character. There's a quality to the sound that's really unusual. It's not really Western. You know what I mean? It comes from another place. A bit like you could sort of go like the didgeridoo comes from another. You know, it's another thing about it, isn't it?
Because one of the themes I want to cover in this Songwriter series is bringing in the traditions that have got a long lineage all the way back. Like later on, there's Sam Nee's going to be. He's been going around the country collecting songs from the people who still carry that knowledge, and also there's going to be a traditional kora player, and of course within the kora tradition, they would traditionally in the kind of true troubadour style, they would go from village to village once they've done their training, carrying the knowledge, keepers of the ancient stories and songs and passing that on. And and that's been partly my experience as well. And it's almost like a different, it's a different aspect to within the umbrella of songwriting, which is the old tradition. And of course we've got this whole last 50, 60 years, whatever, of the pop and things like that. And it's true. And you reminded me when we're kind of same sort of generation, and at that time there was this beautiful tradition which we inherited of the blues tradition, like you say, when you're getting bands together when you were young, what would you do? You'd riff on you'd jam on the blues.
Exactly. And
it was a perfect format to get to know each other and cut your musical teeth.
Thing is, you see, that music is a language. I mean, you go, music's a language, but I mean, no, it really is a language, and there are different dialects within the language. So if you're playing the blues, you say things in a particular way. If you're playing jazz, you say them in another way. And, we've lost that idea, but in say, Indian music, the tabla player is talking to the sitar player, and the sitar player, that's the way it works. There is a communication, there is a conversation going on. And it's interesting that when you work with really good players and I'm lucky that I've got some good friends who I work with, and it's that same sort of thing with the drummer. He's talking to you and you're talking to him through whatever it is you're doing, the rhythm guitar part or whatever. And it's that sort of thing that you don't hear spoken about. If I see people who play contemporary music, it's like, well, that's what the guitar's doing. It's a 4/4. No, it's what's it saying? And the early bluesmen would have thought like that. What is the sort of thing that T-Bone Walker would have said? What's the thing that B.B. King is saying? Instead of it being, well, it's these notes. Because it's not about the notes, it's about the phraseology and all sorts of things, isn't it? So going back to what you're saying there, that tradition of people bringing with them the song, the stories, and sometimes the stories can be in the song without the words. There's something about that song that carries a story just within the music. And I think once it's not a case of intellectually working that out. I think it's a case of being aware of it and feeling it, that music does this to me, or expresses this to me. And there's no right or wrong, it's just like, how does that make you feel? And I think that's a very important thing. So, as you're saying, with that sort of work that these people are doing, brings us a little bit closer to that, I think.
I think also there's my journey with songwriting has been, there has to be the received part of it, the Midas touch or whatever that clear creativity has to. It's a bit like when you hear about how Bob Dylan, for example, is famous for he doesn't waste any time. it's just really, it just comes through really fast. And I guess you get good at that. You know, some people like Joni Mitchell, for example, they're famous for crafting, and Leonard Cohen might spend 10 years, right, to get something like that. And there's all these wonderful different, wonderful different modes you can use with songwriting.
That, what you've said there, I think is really important, because I think all of those people would, in some shape or form, say that there is a muse of some description. There's something that they feel resonates when they're in the space, where they're creating. Because Neil Young made a comment in one of his books saying, "The muse hasn't visited me for quite a while," and I'm cool with that. It's almost like, I'm sort of here, type of thing, but she hasn't visited, and that is something I think is really important. That thing of it's a court. I always think it's like a courtship somehow. You've got to do the work as part of it, but you can't demand it. It has to come, and it has to find in sort of Picasso's thing. Inspiration has to find you working, and I think that's an important.
Well, I had that experience actually when I was still living in Glastonbury. I was very aware that I'd lost that spark of creativity, that just songs I kind of got used to it, take it for granted, and then I just consciously took the decision to use the time to get into the masters, like all the ones I mentioned so far, Leonard Cohen, Paul Simon, all my heroes, as it were. And it was coming at that kind of thing, as opposed to when you're young, you just kind of naturally get into all the influences, all the obvious influences, and then but doing it at a more mature age, it was a beautiful experience, because it was like I was able to really get it. And this is another theme I want to bring up in this series, which is the theme of interpretation, which of course brings us back to the old traditional songs that I just mentioned. That is all about interpretation. But what it gave me was it was almost like going back to school as well, and at the same time having a new appreciation for why these people are who they are. Paul Simon, Leonard Cohen, etc., etc.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing, that obviously when you get people that are inspiration like that, they're not one-trick ponies. So even though somebody may have a technique that they use, that's not just the one thing that they do. There are lots of things. Paul Simon's a great example of that, because you can look at some songs and go, I get that. It's a great, poetry. And that one you can sort of squint at and go, there's a sort of cut-up thing going on there. And then this one, there's a lot of interesting references to, some sort of almost magical thing going on in this. There are lots of things like this you can look at, and I think that's great. And you can, as you say, you can then learn from them, but it's not the same thing. If you sit down and try to write like Paul Simon, you can sort of do the thing with the Paul Simon, because I do NLP and stuff like that. This sort of thing of modelling somebody by almost taking on their part of their personality. I know it sounds a bit crazy, but it's a bit of a rabbit hole to go down. But there are a lot of people who can do that stuff, and it's almost like you're getting a mind frame that's similar. You can sort of almost squint at what it is that they're doing, but you still need to connect somehow. You can use that as the doorway, but again, you can do it as an exercise. But it doesn't mean to say that you'll end up with something that's really great. It might be that you do that and it's sort of like, okay, and then you sit down and do something else.
Well, it's like all the greatest musicians, the best achievement is that you've finally found your own sound.
Totally.
And whether you're an instrumentalist like Pat Metheny is one of my favourite examples, or a songwriter, and that was my experience. Was actually when I then started to receive songs again, it was like, and then I realised, and then you can see it, like there was even old influences, like old hymns I used to sing in school would suddenly come out, and then it was like, oh, that was that Paul Simon moment I had, and later on, and then I saw his last concert in Europe in Hyde Park a few years back, and that was a peak moment as well, and that then I got into, then I got the biography, and it was just like just getting that Paul, and just almost like coming, really. It's almost like finishing off that part of my life in terms of the Paul Simon part of my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Paul Simon is, obviously one of the greatest. And you mentioned a number of... Joni Mitchell's another one that, we could spend all evening talking about Joni Mitchell. Joni Mitchell's thing is that ability, because she's an artist. You can almost see how she comes from an artistic perspective. This thing of she just tunes a guitar differently and writes a song on it. As you know, if you use different tunings, it changes everything. And you can't get that song in another tuning. It's not quite the same. It's like another doorway. And she was doing this all the time, and to have thought of that in itself is a stroke of genius, really. So there's, Joni Mitchell, Paul Simon, as you say. I mean, Paul Simon is somebody that I really, really like. Even, like all the material, because you can look into his work and he leaves traces in there of how he's done it, almost like enticing you in somehow. Whereas certain other people, I mean, Leonard Cohen probably is not like that, because you look at that and you just think, well, that's just incredible. Where do you start? Where do you start to get, a lyric like that? Because it's incredible. So I think that's interesting when you get these different flavours of artists. Another one that I really like, obviously, is Bowie. And again, it's like you can with Bowie. I can see what Bowie's up to only because I've spent a lot of time, like you've done with certain people, looking at what has been going on with him, in his work and who he was working with, and understanding how some of these, some of the techniques that he uses. And again, as I said, cut up can be used for everything. And they certainly used it with chord sequences. Heroes is a really good example of that. Because that chord sequence doesn't make sense. It's the wrong amount of bars and all the rest of it. And he accommodates that by bringing the vocal in at different places to make that work. But again, that's a sort of Brian Eno touch there. Yeah, so it's one of these things I don't think you could ever tire of studying people. But you were saying about like the bluesmen and some of those early players, and they've always fascinated me. I mean, my first thing was I love the Kings, all three of them. Obviously, B.B. King. The fact that B.B. King, when he first started playing, he was quite a busy guitar player. He played more like Charlie Christian sort of guitar, very sort of jazzy, sort of rolly type, that type of thing. Lots of a lot of runs like this, right? But in the end, it becomes more like really.
That's what he's kind of became famous for, yeah.
Yeah, that sort of thing with that singing tone. Yeah, you could almost sort of get that sort of thing where he's sort of, but it's very sort of soft and like one note, and you think that developed over time, which is weird because it's like going the opposite direction to the sort of shredders. It's like how.
A bit like Count Basie, really. He was famous for that as well. It's just minimal.
Yes, that's a great point. Yeah, yes, totally. Very, very sort of. He had a sort of a touch, didn't he, of being able to play just very subtle things. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And obviously Count Basie.
Less is more.
Had an awesome rhythm guitar player, Freddie Green. Just incredible sort of comping guitar player. So I really like those. Freddie King, I absolutely love. But the person I really sort of latched onto later, and it's sort of a bit weird this because he doesn't do very much, is John Lee Hooker. That sort of thing. And I've sort of been messing around with ideas, where you just get, and a lot of the old bluesmen do this, where they don't have a structure at all. Muddy Waters used to do stuff like this as well, but you get that sort of thing. It's basically an E chord. And that's it. You can see where that Hendrix got his idea for Voodoo Child.
Well, it's almost like with the blues and songwriting, it's almost like a shamanic experience. It's almost like
totally.
It's about who. It's almost like more about who the musician and the singer is.
Yes.
And then of course it got amalgamated into pop music and and things, and a lot of the juice got taken out of it.
I think that you've absolutely hit the nail on the head.
And that's one of the things I've loved researching personally is the roots and following the roots all the way back to Africa as well. And the shamanic links as well.
Right. Let's go down that rabbit hole.
And the links with New Orleans. One of my most surreal experiences was I got lucky enough to play on an album of Dr. John. He came over to play with a lot of Brit pop stars.
Right.
And I was just happened to go into the studio. Yeah. When he was just working out a kind of bit of an intro for the album. Yeah. And I tell you, I watched his fingers going over the keyboards, and it was almost like they weren't touching the keyboards. Yeah. And I think that's the thing with certain musicians, you get to a certain level of depth where there's something goes beyond the music. Something is going beyond the music.
Yeah, that is totally right. I mean, that's my experience of that as well, because that is going back to the reggae thing. That's also in the reggae thing. They had their men of power. Bunny Wailer's a good example of that. These people that were really, let's say that shamanic. You could also say sort of superhuman. They were doing things that were very strange, and people were aware of that. I mean, it's this great story that I can't remember the journalist who was on the radio several years ago. Had written a book about reggae, and he tells this story about trying to organise a meeting with Bunny Wailer of the Wailers, right? And he's at this studio, and he said, "Well, how do I get in contact with him?" This guy said, "Well," this guy in the studio said, "Well, when do you want to see him?" He said, "Well, it'd be great if I could see him sort of tomorrow." He said, "Well, the best thing is just go and there's this tree outside. Just go and sit out underneath the tree and speak to the tree and tell him that you want to see Bunny Wailer and ask, tell him a time." So he's this, British guy sitting under this tree, thinks, I feel like a complete chump, I'll meet him at 5:00 tomorrow, if that's okay, and that was it, So the next day he comes back, and 5:00, it turns out Bunny Wailer's sitting under the tree. It's like he'd not told this other guy that that's the time or anything. It's like weird, totally strange. But if you've met people, you think, well, there is something going on that we don't understand.
Well, I think it's more about, okay, there's a certain depth to certain kinds of music which you either feel it or you don't. And let's say, yes, it was a miracle that, say, Bob Marley, and the way he managed to meet with Island Records, and they managed to make a way to make it more palatable for Western audiences, etc. But it was essentially religious music.
Yes.
And that's why it's had such a strength and such a power behind it.
Totally.
And you could say that for a lot. I remember watching. There's a wonderful film of Bo Diddley playing at this concert that John Lennon got together when he did a sort of he sort of did a rare appearance when he was living in the States. But the Bo Diddley thing was the one I latched onto because it was the first time I went, oh my God, this is trance music.
Yeah, yeah. One chord.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
One chord. That's it.
Yeah.
You know, off you go.
Yeah.
You're saying about, you know, the way that reggae found its way, and whatever. Going back to that conversation I had with George Kelly, he was talking about the Rastafarian drumming thing. And that's just a very simple thing of, you know, like the pattern is something like, that's basically all the drum is doing. And they're chanting over the top of that. And then somebody's leading it who might do a bit more. And that was the sort of fundamental Rastafarian thing of, you know, singing praises and all the rest of it. And that sort of works its way in. So you've got, as you say, like this spiritual powerhouse coming in. And again, we've sort of lost that link with our own spiritual traditions, whether you think about church music or whatever. You know, a lot of that is sort of slipped away. It's become sort of diluted and whatever, or commoditized or something, you know. But there are certain songs that still have power. You know, certain hymns that you can hear and think, oh my God, that's it does something. Mm-hmm. But we've just almost lost the ear for that, or the feeling, or whatever it is, that receptive thing. But maybe because we're aware, and a lot of people are aware of it now, like you were talking about that, and the link with shamanism, and people are sort of connecting to the fact that there is something else, and it's not just that sort of left-brained analytical thing. There's just that touch of magic, whether that's in music or dance or acting or all those art forms. There is something there, and that is the tricky thing when you write a song, because you don't know whether it's going to arrive or not.
There's something I remembered earlier. Actually, I was going to say. I just recently, you know, that experience. Sometimes you kind of, you might have heard a song before, but you kind of rediscover it and you fall in love for a moment with it. My way of, and sometimes I might just quickly research it, and then while I'm in love with that song, I get my own interpretation together. I don't know if I'll do it with this particular song, but it was one of those kind of examples, and it was. I found out that I don't watch TV, so I wouldn't know, but apparently it was used in a Qantas ad, Qantas Airlines ad, which is Feels Like Home. Do you know the song? Feels like home, feels like... And it was... But anyway, and then it was a lovely moment, and that's the beautiful thing about the internet these days. You can quickly research it, and it turns out it was a Randy Newman song.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah.
And he used it for his music. He wrote it for his musical called Faust.
Yeah.
And he actually wrote it for Bonnie Raitt.
Oh.
But actually, when I did a quick research on the best version, it was this version for the Qantas ad.
Right.
A lovely young Australian singer.
Right.
And but it was the surprise was actually the best version. And when you read down the comments on YouTube, a lot of people were saying, "Yeah, this is the best version." You know, was this this very organic, rootsy version?
Yeah.
You know, and it's the beautiful example of interpretation. You know, there was a pop version and Bonnie Raitt, yeah, it was nice, but you know, this was just very homely, rootsy kind of version.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And it really brought out the song.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, interpretation, very important, isn't it? You know, how do you, again, I'm always intrigued by people who can take a song by a great person and make that song even better. You know, and that's a very difficult thing to do, isn't it? I mean,
sorry, I have to quote a song. What's the obvious quote there?
Well,
take a sad song.
And yeah, make it better. Yeah. So obviously, somebody who the elephant in the room for me is Hendrix. You know. So
let's touch on Hendrix for a moment. We can't not. He is. You know, he seems to be also such a giant amongst all the greatest. Everybody is like. Hendrix.
And an incredible songwriter. I mean, and he had some interesting techniques for songwriting because they're simple. the songs are actually quite simple, but apparently in his house they found a guitar after he died that was strung right-handed because he was left-handed, but he could play a right-handed guitar. But the scratch marks on the guitar showed that he was actually playing it right-handed. So a right-handed guitar being played right-handed, but he was using it for his songwriting. And that makes sense. Because as a guitar player, one of the biggest problems is you can get carried away. You want a song idea? Okay. What can you... And suddenly you've got a riff or something, and you're stuck. But if you're playing and it's like, well, no, it's got to be, okay.
It kind of grounds it.
It does, it grounds it.
I actually found that with the kora. When I'm playing the kora, I'm limited, because it's quite a modal instrument. So it can be good to...
So we're going back to that thing about simplifying down. So, so once Hendrix has got that basic idea of his art, that's nice. So you've got... That's your G chord, right? A minor. E minor, okay. You can do all your fancy stuff, but it's still those chords. Instead of going, I've got this great riff. And I think that's the thing about learning how to get the basics, get the structure, and then let it take its course. So what you're saying about the kora, there's certain things you can do there.
But also, one has to mention, of course, with Hendrix, his deep roots in the blues. There was that classic Charles Shaw Murray book, which I think opened up a lot, definitely for me, made me more aware of that side of Hendrix.
So, obviously, Hendrix was an amazing blues player. And again, it's all in that phraseology that he's got, But he was able to do all these other things. He had this sort of country player thing going on, but of course he also had the jazz influence. There's a lot of Wes Montgomery stuff in Hendrix's playing. The octave playing that he does. He's got that in Fire.
And he made a big connection with Miles Davis, and I think they almost
well, the thing is that you've got the Miles Davis double stopping. If you listen to, we're going to get a bit sort of anarchy here. The sort of Gil Evans, Miles Davis stuff, Sketches of Spain and all that. There's all this stuff going on in the brass. There's all these double stop type things in fourths and things, but that's in Hendrix's playing.
Well, apparently, when Mike Stern was playing with Miles Davis when he started up again, apparently Miles said, I can't do the voice, play like Hendrix.
Play like Hendrix. So Hendrix had that thing, and some of those chord sequences are like a sort of jazz thing, Obviously, Third Stone from the Sun's got all these weird jazz chords at the beginning, and then that melody in octaves, and that bass line, which is almost like that 4/6, which is fourths, I think. That sort of thing. It's not quite that, but it's that idea, right? And Hendrix has sort of cribbed all of that, but the interesting thing is, it always sounds like Jimmy. It doesn't sound like, he's nicked that off of. Even that riff, which we were messing around earlier, that sort of Muddy Waters, Johnny Hooker thing. Yeah, it sounds like Jimmy. It'll be Voodoo Child. And I think that's the thing, because that's the voice. What you were saying. Find their voice.
You've got to find your voice. You've got to make it your own.
But I think the thing with Jimmy is his songwriting, because it's brilliant, and it's not often that you get good guitarists who are good songwriters. There are very few. Obviously Clapton's one, Mark Knopfler's one, but all these sort of shredding type guitarists, not generally. There might be one reasonable song somewhere, but. But these guys could really churn them out.
There's the lovely cosmic compositional connection as well, in terms of he lived in the same house as I think it was Handel.
Oh yes, yeah.
And where there's a Handel museum and I think a Hendrix museum.
Yeah. It's bizarre.
So anyway, definitely a little bit cosmic.
Yeah. But I think the interesting thing is that wouldn't have been lost on Hendrix. That he was in the house that somebody like that was living in. Yeah, it's bizarre. So I think that's one of the things I love about his playing. And again, he's one of these people that you can go back to a piece of music you think you know it inside out and back to front, and you'll notice something else. Mm. You think, oh God, so you're doing that, is it? And, again, Zeppelin's another one for me. You can return to a song and think, oh, there's a jazz trick in there. So yeah, it's I've been playing music now for a long time. Well over 45 years, and it's like, it just never gets boring. No. Never gets boring. And like you said, with all the shamanic stuff as well, you start to think, oh, what's going on with,
But I love, it just to finish off, I love the way that we've managed to bring in the theme of the future. And future generations into this conversation with the work you're doing with kids, with songwriting, and that's very heartening. My own particular focus is with voice work, but of course it's all linked, and but that's partly why I'm creating a big focus on songwriting and all the links. All the various links. That's why I got a lovely variety of interpreters and songwriters and artists in the series. So it's been
best of luck with that because it sounds great.
Yeah, so it's been it's been great to start.
It's been good.
This has been a great place to start. And
it's nice to be this side of the the interview situation.
And what we're going to finish off with?
We did sort of think about this little blues thing. But just. Because there's a couple of slides knocking around on the table, isn't there?
And just for the audience, just explain what this guitar is that you've got here.
Well, this guitar is sort of a resonator, because that gives it that sort of that particular tone. I can't really say more about it than that. But what's interesting about this one, this guitar is made by a guy called Pete Turner, who's made guitars for all sorts of people, Paul McCartney and Mark Knopfler and people like that. But what's nice about it is you've got that. It's got a real sort of old style jazz. Sort of, again, you like sort of Charlie Christian. Then, because once you put that down into that. Sort of dirty country blues thing, right?
So what are we going to play?
Well, let's see. Let's see what we get. I'm going down the Rosedale, take the river by my side. Said I'm going down the Rosedale, take the river by my side. Go down the crossroads. Run, you can run. Get my friend Willie Brown. Brown. Cause I'm standing at the crossroads and I feel I'm sinking down. listen. Feel I'm sinking down.
So, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And,
Pleasure. Thank you.
yeah, let's do it again sometime.
Definitely. Good. Thank you, Ravi.